name is Terry Condos. I am the Vice President and Voter Services Chair of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County, and I'm so pleased to welcome you and have you join us this afternoon. On behalf of the League, I welcome you to our Hot Topics presentation, The Future of Investigative Journalism. Today's program is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel later on. Any use of that recording other than showing it in its entirety requires written permission from the League. At the end of the presentations of our speakers, we will be taking questions. But the way we would like that to work is for you to put your questions in chat, and Colleen Friedman, who's our secretary, will present those questions on your behalf in a reasonable order to our presenters. We are proud to welcome two distinguished journalists who have been and continue to shape the future of accountability reporting in our region. Emily Lacose is Suncoast Searchlight's executive editor-in-chief and oversees the newsroom's editorial strategy and day-to-day operations. She comes to Suncoast Searchlight from USA Today, where she spent 5 years as an investigative reporter and editor, producing and overseeing some of the news organization's most ambitious work. Prior to USA Today, Emily led Gatehouse Media's National Data and Investigations team, which published its work throughout the country. She also previously served as deputy investigations editor of the Sarasota Herald Tribune, where she was part of the award-winning Bias on the Bench series. Her work over the years has won multiple awards, including the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award, the APME Public Service Award, the ASNE Batten Medal, the SPJ Sigma Delta Chi Award, and National Headliner Award for Public Service, among others. She has also been a finalist for the Goldsmith Prize for Investigative Reporting and the Selden Ring Award. Thank you, Emily, so much for joining us. We also have with us Dawn Kitterman. Dawn covers our local government, transparency, and community issues for the Bradenton Times, and she has absolutely earned a reputation as one of Manatee County's most persistent watchdog reporters. Her work has exposed irregularities involving former County Administrator Scott Hopes, uncovered problems with the Veterans Housing Project, and provided clear, accessible analysis of candidates and elections. Showing the data is a hallmark of Dawn's work. She is known for her meticulous research, compelling storytelling, and unwavering commitment to keeping the public informed about decisions that affect their daily lives. Thank you both very much for joining us. So we're going to allow each of our speakers to present some comments, their perspective, give us their take on the importance of investigative reporting. And as I said, if our participants, our viewers, could please put their questions into chat, Colleen will have an opportunity to tee up those questions for our speakers after they've been able to give their comments. So we'll start with you, Emily. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for the issues. I couldn't find the link, so Dawn sent me her link. So I'm Dawn Kitterman in disguise. So thank you all so much for being here. This is such an important topic, and I'm honored to be able to share this space with you. I thought first I would just kind of say, well, what is investigative journalism? It is definitely something that we hear a lot about, but how is it different from regular journalism? And I like to think of it as investigative journalism is, like daily journalism tells us what happened. Investigative journalism explains why it happened, how it happened, and whether it should have happened at all. So investigative journalism typically exposes some type of wrongdoing or an abuse of power or systemic failure. It relies on a document review, data, public record, and deep sourcing. So it doesn't come from a press release or just going to a county or government meeting. It aims to hold powerful institutions and people accountable, and it often takes weeks or months to report, not hours or days. And so it is a deep investment of time and resources for newsrooms to do investigative reporting. It also typically involves reporters with more experience and just more bandwidth. And so, some examples of investigative reporting are, for example, we did last summer collaboration with Florida Trident, looking at Sarasota County's handling of the back-to-back hurricanes in 2024, and in particular, its lead up to and response to Debbie, which caused catastrophic flooding throughout Sarasota County, and found that there was a series of pretty deep failures within that department, within the stormwater department in the county, that leaders knew about for a very long time and failed to address. And these lapses exacerbated the flooding that we saw. So that was a great example, and it had impact. As a result of our reporting, the county fast-tracked the creation of a standalone stormwater department, appointed a standalone stormwater chief, and we also saw the resignation of one of the county assistant administrators in the wake of our reporting as well. So pretty quick series of impacts, and that is also pretty typical of investigative reporting, is as you tend to see heads roll, so to speak. Another example, we collaborated with the Bradenton Herald and investigated. I'm sure if anybody was paying attention, we all noticed the same sort of drumbeat of teacher misconduct accusations coming out of the Manatee County School District last year. And after about like 6 or 7 weeks of this, we were all like, okay, what's happening? This needs to be investigated. And so we collaborated with journalists over there and investigated, and found that they had missed red flags in the hiring process. And then after these educators were on the job, they'd missed subtle signs of boundary crossings, all of which then snowballed into outright misconduct and abuse. And then of course, Dawn's work is perfect example. Some of the reporting that she's done, including on the veterans housing, were just, fantastic. But I'm sure you've also noticed this, investigative reporting and reporting in general, journalism in general, has suffered a pretty deep blow to the industry. We've lost a lot of resources. The internet changed our revenue model pretty dramatically, and as a result, newsrooms across the country have shed staff. Like dogs shedding fleas after a treatment. I mean, that is a terrible analogy, and I apologize. And I'm glad this recording isn't going to be broadcast everywhere because that sounds bad. But I'm a better writer than I am speaker, guys. But yeah, I mean, the reporting power in this country has shrunk by 3/4 in the past 20 years. And so that is just as true nationally as it is on the local level. And often the first positions to go are the positions that do that deep dive, investigative and explanatory reporting. Again, because it takes an enormous amount of resources. And when you're operating with a fraction of the staff that you used to have, you're making decisions based on what can we fill the newspaper with today? And so you're dispatching reporters to events, press conferences, meetings, and not so much granting them the resources and the time it takes to dig deep. And so that's often the first thing that you miss. And I'm sure everybody's noticed the same thing when they open up the pages of their local newspapers. It is not the meaty content that we used to get 20 years ago. It is often what are the top 10 best burgers to get in town? Or, what new development did commissioners just grant? You rarely get to see, okay, why did they grant that? And did those developers give them campaign contributions, and pulling public records to see the interactions between developers and elected officials that might give you clues as to why certain projects are greenlit despite the environmental consequences, or even that there are environmental consequences. So these are the things that investigative reporters and reporting tend to focus on, and that sadly has been lost. That said, well, and let me go back to this a little bit. We've lost so many newspapers in the past 20 years. I mean, it's just been catastrophic. In fact, just last year alone, on average, it was 130 newspapers closed nationwide. And almost 40% of all local newspapers have vanished since 2005. I mean, so this is a catastrophic blow to the industry and to our democracy, I think, as well. This reduction in watchdogging, because most of us have full-time jobs. We can't sit at 8-hour county commission meetings. That's should be the job of journalists for us to do and report back to you. And so the absence of this reporting power has meant a rise in corruption, a rise in political division, a loss of trust in the industry, and a loss of trust in people in positions of power as well. And so there are all kinds of consequences as a result of this. That said, though, there's more information out there now than ever before, and social media is now a primary news source for most people. It is very rare and probably present company excluded because you seem pretty savvy. I'm sure you're reading New York Times and Washington Post and Sarasota Herald Tribune and the Bradenton Times, and you're going to those sites to get your information, or maybe you're not. But most people these days are just passively absorbing whatever news floats across their social media feed without necessarily understanding where the information is coming from, and that includes so-called investigative information. In fact, when we were chatting a couple weeks before this event, we were talking about that changing landscape and how traditional journalists are now competing against social media influencers for the right to tell the news. And one of my last projects that I did for USA Today was an investigation into the company that was managing the ship that hit the Baltimore Bridge and caused the Baltimore Bridge to collapse. And I was talking with one of the maritime crisis communication people who was organizing these trips for the media to go out on ferries to see the scene of that ship collapse. And he told me that most of the people signing up, most of the journalists signing up for those ferry tours were actually social media influencers and not journalists at all. And when I asked him whether or not they were actually letting these social media influencers on these, media tours, he said that they had all discussed it internally and decided that they would allow them to participate because most of them had larger audiences than the traditional media organization from which these traditional journalists hailed. And so they decided that it was better to give these social media influencers the best information they could since their reach was so much greater than that of traditional journalists. So that is the climate that we're working in today, where we are competing with social media influencers for the right to tell the truth and dig and bring our facts to the forefront. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that we have today is helping people understand and be savvy media consumers to be able to filter through the barrage of information and determine what is legitimate and verifiable versus what is just fed up to you by the algorithm, and that's just stoking your confirmation bias. And so, some of the things that I like to tell people is to, do a check. If you see something on your social media feed, click through, see where it came from. If it's a news source, it should have an about page. It should have named reporters who you can actually contact. It should not just be an aggregation farm, which is, just taking stuff from other sites and rewriting it in a way to make it look like it actually came from them. There ought to be an ethics policy and a corrections policy. And you ought to be able to see if it's been, especially if it's something pretty big or sensational, make sure that other media outlets also have covered it. Media literacy is now a civic skill, right? And that's especially important, I think, within investigations. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about is, beyond the doom and gloom is a silver lining, which is in the ashes of the shrinking newsrooms, the traditional newsrooms, is a proliferation of digital first, legitimate newsrooms like the Bradenton Times and like Suncoast Searchlight and like Florida Trident. These digital first and many of them nonprofit newsrooms are taking the place of the traditional newsrooms. Um, and it's seen as if not the future of journalism, and then certainly the now of journalism and the way in which journalists have tried to wield some power and influence back to be able to practice our craft ethically and responsibly in the service of the public good. So you've got, over the past 5 years alone, there's been more than 300 nonprofit startup newsrooms across the country, both nationally and locally. So, I mean, the national big ones are, ProPublica, the Marshall Project, and some of the Marshall Project, which focuses on criminal justice. You've got things like the Hetchinger Report, which focuses on education. And then you've got these great statewide and local nonprofits like Mississippi Today, Vermont Digger, Flatwater Free Press, Honolulu Civil Beat, The Tributary, and then, of course, Suncoast Searchlight, which covers Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. These are all, philanthropically supported, mission-driven newsrooms whose focus is on, public service rather than profit. And so there is a silver lining. And I think it's, journalists like Dawn, journalists like Michael Barfield, journalists like Jason Garcia, a fantastic Orlando Sentinel investigative reporter who now it has his own Substack. And so you're seeing these little niche Substacks and publications pop up, trying to get the information out that the public really needs. And so I think that's a very broad brush into the state of the media industry and where we are with investigative journalism. I'll turn it over to Dawn now to talk more about what she's doing, what she sees, and then obviously I'm here for questions if you guys have any. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Yes, we'll turn it over to Dawn now. And we're also very grateful for her spending time with us today and for the work that she does every day.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. So, bouncing off of what Emily said, she covered a lot of ground there, and a lot of it is right on par in terms of defining what investigative reporting is, how time consuming it is, and how it contrasts to just regular beat, day-to-day news coverage. If you read the Bradenton Times and you notice the content on the Bradenton Times under my byline, you will see that I do a bit of both. I cover county commission meetings and report on more easily covered without having to spend the same amount of time and resource and public record sourcing and these sort of things to get information out to the public that would be valuable to the public. But then I also do investigative pieces, as both the host noted and Emily noted. And I think at the local level, because I am very hyper local and in what I do, and Emily has experience covering, as she said, even Suncoast Searchlight. While it is local reporting, their service area and coverage area involves multiple counties, which also have cities within them. Bradenton Times and the work that I do is really, really focused in Manatee County, and most hyperly, my resources and time are spent covering the county commission and what happens in the largest local government of Manatee County. Not to say I haven't done reporting in covering other, even one time I did an investigative piece on a fire district issue. And that was the first time and only time I worked on something in that regard. But I think at the hyper local level, investigative reporting is so valuable because it's really an important tool for citizens who are civically minded and want to participate. And really, Emily spoke to the point of, holding elected officials and public entities accountable to their policies and the decisions, or how things are, undertaken if, say, they don't follow their own policies, or sometimes maybe even break the law. But it also is, I think, really a valuable tool for citizens in that the more information they have access to, and the more they understand what the policies and procedures are of their government, where they can go and find information on their own when they have a question, and what their elected officials are doing and saying, and decisions that are being made can help them to both engage on issues that matter to them in a more impactful way. And then also, of course, when you go to the ballot box, you can feel as though you're not just casting a vote because you saw the signs, or you got a catchy commercial across your screen that spoke to you, but you feel like you really have an understanding of one candidate versus another candidate, and what their backgrounds are, and what their resumes, and if they're running for re-election, what their resume and scorecard has been as an elected official. And so I do think it's particularly important investigative journalism at the local level, to Emily's point, just in terms of kind of making democracy work the way it's supposed to for the people and in response to the people. I also agree that it is challenging right now, the state of investigative journalism now, even at the local level. I often notice a perfect example that's happening right now is there is a large community discussion around this proposed cruise port terminal to be possibly constructed there, in the Terracea Aquatic Preserve area. In the immediate of that information, right? So that information was first made public by the company itself, who wanted to announce their intention to do this. They didn't do they really just kind of scratched the surface, like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we want to do, this is where we want to do it. And you didn't really get a whole lot of other details from them in terms of, like, this is where we're at in the process, this is what will come next, this is how you can engage. And so when that became public information, and their op-ed was printed in the Bradenton Herald, a lot of citizens who, I would say expectedly, it should have been expected, heard that information and went, wait, what is happening? What is being proposed in our, and a lot of conversation immediately erupted online, and people were trying to help one another. And I think it was all, of course, coming from the best place. Citizens wanted to be engaged. They care about their community. This is, it has a lot of potential future impacts if this cruise port were to become an actual thing, in terms of not just the people who live right adjacent to that area, but people who care about the ecology and the environmental impacts, but then also the infrastructural questions about traffic and community culture, and what might that mean for what Manatee County would be going into the future. And so citizens began having these conversations in real time and sharing information as they understood it, or their perspective on it. And what ultimately happened, what I watched happen in real time, was there ended up being, and not to anyone's specific fault, but misunderstandings about what exactly had happened in terms of where that idea was at in the process, and at what stage and in what ways it would be most beneficial perhaps for the citizens to then respond to that. Because you need to know where in the process you are to know what your opportunities are going to be. So to more illustrate, that project is in the process of being in what is called a pre-app situation. It's not a full application at this point. It could become that. It also might not become that. That does not mean that it is not time, that the citizens should stand down necessarily and wait. If they feel very passionate, always reach out to your elected officials and let them know how you feel. Send emails. You can find emails generally all of your local elected officials, and at the state level and Congress people, even if you can't find a direct email, you should be able to find some sort of communication form you can fill out online. However, what was very confusing about the lack of detailed information around where this proposal for a cruise port was in the process was that the biggest difference, I think, between a pre-application and an actual development application in terms of for the public's perspective and their opportunities to engage on the issue is that in a pre-application, there's no public hearings yet scheduled before your county commission. There's not yet, there's not a date yet that it will be going before the planning commission. So that those things don't happen until an actual application comes in. So if a citizen hears about this, is very engaged on this issue, and then they're seeing other people saying, because those folks online have understood, oh, this is going to go before the planning commission, we just got, it might, but that might cause certain citizens to say, well, I'll just stand by and wait if it's coming to the planning commission soon, and I will attend that. Where if they're very engaged on that issue and they have a strong position, if they understand the nuance of the process and where it is in the process, it might better inform them that actually, I don't want to wait for that. I want to let everybody know right now, how I might feel about that and why this brings me concern, or I support it, or, what have you. So that is one of the struggles that I notice sometimes in kind of where we are in the age of internet and media influencers. To Emily's point, she gave some really great how-tos when it comes to discerning, should you completely dismiss what this source is saying or take it with a grain of salt, maybe try to find comparisons or fact check it yourself, and what sources overall are offering you access to their process and their bylines, like who's behind, if it's a Substack or something, are they telling you who these reporters are, and are you able to contact them, all of the things that Emily said, because in a rapid fire situation with news. And of course, I'm speaking from the local level, but most citizens who, are civically engaged, they're not only looking at the local level, they're following state news, maybe neighboring counties, national news. It's a lot. It can feel like drinking from a fire hose and then as quickly as it comes, that too the saturation of it can make it challenging sometimes to figure out what is information you can count on and what is spin, or somebody maybe who is working under some sort of other motivation, which could simply, in this day and age and with the internet, and Emily used the term influencers, in this day and age, the motivation could possibly just be more clicks, views, and shares. And so obviously printing things that are very charged and emotional, or presenting what sounds like reporting in a very, we're telling you how to feel about this or what to think about this way, might be some of your first clues that somebody's trying to lead you into a response rather than inform you plainly. I often, if you read my lengthier investigative pieces, because we're in a digital platform, because when I was on the other side of the news desk and I was a consumer of news, I did not like when I would read about an in-depth piece and I felt like the journalist or publication was not giving me access, like a clear cut where I could feel certain, like they've written this and stated this to be a fact, and this is how I know they know this is a fact. And so that is why you will often see many, many, many blue highlighted words in my reporting, because I take my homework and as much of it as I can ethically and responsibly without, involving other people or personal details or what have you, I will turn it into files that I can then link and give my readers access to, because I feel my ultimate responsibility in being, if I, producing and reports based on my investigative work, is to not tell the reader what my conclusions or my perspective on the issue is, even though I'm human and I may have one, but to very carefully just simply lay all the facts that I was able to confirm to afford them the ability to then take those under consideration and come to their own conclusions and decide for themselves where and in what way they want to engage on that issue, follow that issue, think of that issue, what have you. I will say, I know we're speaking mostly on kind of the future of investigative journalism. And again, to what Emily said, and as I just explained about the age of the internet and Emily's point about declining resources and how much time it takes, I mean, that I think is a significant difference that maybe many readers don't understand between the resources, the financial resources and time that it takes to do investigative work, as opposed to just I'm covering something that happened in a board meeting, or I'm giving you information that the county put out in a press release with some additional comments and insights. Investigative reporting requires sourcing records, building relationships with sources, reaching out to people sometimes repeatedly, hoping that they'll maybe consider talking to you, in participating in a way where they're included publicly, or a lot of times, depending on the issue, people don't want to have their names out there for various reasons. And so in that situation, there's added time there, because if I have one source who is willing to say to me, I know about this thing, XYZ that happened, I believe this isn't how it should have happened, I think this violates some policy, then my job is to, but then they say, but I would like to not, you didn't hear this from me. I can't jeopardize my career. I feel like I might be retaliated against. This was a very, very common part of my work, especially under the tenure of the former county administrator at Manatee County between about 21 to 22, 23. I had a lot of sources who talked with me about things that were concerning to them that they felt they knew about. And so I cannot take those people at their word, even if I think that they are qualified. And if they're not willing to put their name on what they're telling me, then my job is to then go and start with, okay, what are the premise of what they're saying and what they feel, is not okay about this. Compare that against what is the written policies. What are the county's ordinance and resolutions, that may apply? What's in the public record in terms of prior meetings or historical content related to, this issue or connected to the processes related to this issue. And then if I'm able to confirm that far, like, oh yes, there I see that this does raise some questions, then I have to go and see if I can find additional sources willing to speak with me who have firsthand knowledge or direct knowledge of some part of the issue that has played out here, if I want to use any of the information that I cannot completely pin down in a black and white public record and verify to be a fact. Then if I have to rely on others who feel some reluctance about publicly putting their name on, I know this is a fact because I was there, then it requires me to basically as Emily was saying about, ethic policy and standards and stuff. In my world, I will never, anything you've ever seen written in my reporting where it says a source who declined to be quoted or attributed in this reporting said XYZ, I will never use information from one source to source. I must have at least three, and typically I have more than three that are lending me the perspective and direction. So that understanding how much time all of that can take. Like Emily said, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it can take months to get to the point of actually feeling like you've really got a solid hands around and you can present the facts of the matter enough to give the public a fair shot at coming to their own conclusion. That can take quite some time. And of course, in most any other, when you think of most any other sorts of work, employment type things, many times you're producing a product or doing an action that's more directly tangible, rather than this build up and then you produce it at the end. I mean, not that doesn't happen. There are other examples. Art is a great example. Music, people in the music industry obviously spend a lot of time working on things that their consumers don't have access to until and of course the other big difference being, as Emily stated, readership, and especially for nonprofit newsrooms and publications, we don't really have consumers per se. So jumping back to what I was saying about being mindful of the world of that we live in virtually now with the internet and influence, being influencers, clicks and shares and all of this. The Bradenton Times, speaking just for our publication, it is irrelevant how much a story is read or clicked or shared to the work that we do, or whether I get paid, or whether we open our doors the next day. We are not propelled by, my Facebook page, or the Bradenton Times Facebook page is not making money every time you click and share, or we are funded by our publisher, which is a former county commissioner, Joe McClash. He established the Bradenton Times in 2009. He was a Republican commissioner, served on the county commission for, I believe, 22 years. And the paper is largely self-funded and funded by the community who voluntarily offers to pay subscriptions to help keep us going. So I think that is a really important thing to understand too, about in this current environment of reporting and journalism and seeking information, and especially investigative reporting, is understanding also where your publication is, kind of what keeps them going. And I want to add a caveat there to say, just because someone, Emily gave a perfect example in Jason Garcia, he does that Substack, Seeking Rents. Just because an independent reporter, has a podcast and is perhaps making money off of ad revenue or clicks and shares, and you're obviously helping to support what they do, and they're also asking for public. I believe Mr. Garcia does accept like tips and donations from the community, does not automatically mean that you cannot trust what they say. It's just important to understand kind of the whole picture combined in terms of what their funding sources are, what their resume is, and how accessible are they to you in terms of if you want to speak to somebody at that outlet, if you have a question about their reporting, and how accessible do they make the information they work from. Jason Garcia, if you he follows very closely the state legislative sessions. And often when you go and look at his coverage, especially while the legislative sessions are active, he too is a committed linker. He will link you to all the places where you can go and see exactly what he's explaining with his reporting, which I think is very helpful, especially at the legislative session that happens in a blink. And there's another perfect example of trying to be involved and engaged as a citizen in a rapid fire, just taking it all in. So I think I've covered just about everything. The other one thing I did want to add concerning, so how does the Bradenton Times decide what issues we will look into, what issues will we not, when it comes to investigative reporting? We receive many tips. We hear from the community almost daily, from everything from issues that people have had with their HOAs and serious concerns with their HOAs to environmental questions or issues with certain county departments, code enforcement, or all the way to tips and inside information like somebody county employee believes somebody believes a county employee did something that would be potentially unethical or at worst completely against the law. Generally, because resources are so thin and because it can take so long to follow up on things, one of the first measures that myself and my editor have when we're kind of discussing the different bits and pieces we're hearing from the community about is, does the issue impact like how much of the community, right? So an HOA thing would be very specific to just the folks living in that community. So for me to spend weeks learning the ins and outs and verifying all the claims there, sometimes, especially when there's so much other stuff happening at the local level that is, I guess, of a higher priority, impacting more people's backyards, we're just simply not able to take up that kind of stuff. And I often think to myself that engaged and involved citizens, I think this landscape of where we are now and the ability in journalism with the internet and whatever, and the ability to provide information so quickly with your neighbors, your other folks in your communities, really gives an opportunity to citizens who want to be, kind of citizen journalists, if they want to take that responsibility on and they feel they know an issue inside and out and they can help their neighbors or their HOA residents say, here's where you can see and follow this issue to where we are today. And then we can have a conversation around what sort of action can we take now? You can still help to share information, and with platforms the way they are, and I'm sure any of you who are involved on Nextdoor or Facebook, you see this. There are many community specific oriented where there's lots of sorts of different information sharing. And we saw this a lot, I would say, in Manatee County during leading up to the 2024 election, specific to communities who were having conversations around who their district representatives would be, and who their options were, and helping to more hyper educate their neighbors. And again, I think what Suncoast Searchlight and the Bradenton Times and even the Bradenton Herald, the Bradenton Journal does information sharing and reporting. I'm not sure if the reporter there does a lot of investigative stuff, but definitely reporting and covering kind of on the ground community things going on and what's happening in the county commission, and some editorial stuff. All of these kind of work together to thread that basis to prop up and make for the tools to prop up the community's ability to be engaged, understand, and participate in their local government.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Dawn. Thank you so much. So this is a hot topic for the League of Women Voters. We call this hot topics, but this is truly a hot topic. And we thank you again. So I think we've got some good questions that Colleen is going to tee up for us. But this is just so important because from a league perspective, it's not just about the right to vote and the ability to vote for everyone who is legally qualified. You have to know what you're voting about, and that's really the gap that we see. And it really falls into where we talk about supporting and serving voters. And so, truly a hot topic to talk about how important it is for voters to have a rich and diverse and data-driven set of sources that help them understand how they would want to vote. So with that, Colleen, have we got some great questions that you want to throw at our speakers?
We have a lot of questions. However, Emily has been doing a great job of answering them. She's such a great journalist. She's just been putting in the facts under the questions, but I do want to give Dawn a chance to add anything that she might want to. So the first, of course, had to do with credentials, and Emily said many people have journalism credentials, but maybe both of you can just tell us exactly what your credentials are, and maybe how you got started.
Sure, I can go. But my point in the chat is there's no special like credentials that we have. We don't sit for some exam and get licensed by, any kind of a body. A lot of us do have journalism degrees, but a lot of us don't. But the tools that we use are the same ones available to any of you, which is why the First Amendment is so important. It is the access to, I mean, the First Amendment is free speech, free press, free to petition your government, free to assemble, and of course, freedom of religion. We use public records law and public meetings law. We members of the public have access to public information and people in positions of power, elected positions, and we apply those tools to investigate and produce reports for you all. But most of us do have degrees in something, or got our start working for a college newspaper or freelancing or what have you.
Dawn?
Well, I'm a little bit of an outlier here. I actually have no journalism background prior to the Bradenton Times, at least not on paper journalism background. I spent most of my adult life either as a early childhood educator or as a stay-at-home mom. I had some other odd jobs, worked in art galleries and frame shops, and I also briefly worked on an organic farm when I was much, much younger. So I don't have a textbook background. However, the way that I ended up at the Bradenton Times was I began following, it was early in the pandemic when we were all on stay-at-home orders. I wanted local information about the state of what was happening in our community, right? We all had access to the 24/7 media. We could see images in stuff of hospitals being overrun in Ohio or, Canada or something. But I was like, I really want to know, I need to know, what are the impacts here in my community? How is my community preparing and responding? And what should I do as a citizen in my community in response to all of this, in terms of being a parent and a neighbor? And so I began turning into the local county commission meetings to get that information. And then I began watching all of the county commission meetings. And after several months of doing this, I began seeing certain things happening in the meeting that led me to questions. And I quickly learned that I could research the public record, to Emily's point about, the tools are there for all of us to use. We're not we don't have some magic access that the general public would not have under what is legally required. But the big thing is everything's recorded in the public record somewhere. If it happens, in a public hearing, in a board meeting. Now, obviously, sometimes things aren't done the way they're supposed to do or by the rules, and that can complicate things. But moreover, I was able to go and find where I could search board records, documents, different things, and began educating myself. Then I quickly turned to social media, what I was just describing, and created a community group and began trying to share what I was learning and teaching others. Hey, this is where you can go find this. This is where you can get this. This is how you can confirm this. This is who these people are and what they do and what their roles are. And that is where the editor of the Bradenton Times, fast forward several months into that, found me and said, hey, what do you do for a living? Have you ever thought about being a reporter, especially a local government reporter? Because it is much of what you're doing now. Offered me an internship. I accepted. I was supposed to intern for a year. I interned for about, I think, 6 or 7 months before the publisher and the editor agreed that I had proven my skills. And here I am.
Oh, thank you. And actually, you also touched on something that one of the questioners was asking specifically, what does a citizen journalist need? Do they need any kind of credential to access those public records? Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, in short, specifically to public records, no.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it's really important to in the need or to be mindful of to have is discernment, patience, and a clear, I don't quite know what the right word would say be to explain what I'm trying to say, I guess, what your motivation really is. If you're leading with a, I want this goal, I'm doing this for this result, then the information you put out can inadvertently or accidentally be leading toward what it is. But if you lead with a, I want to understand this and I want to help other people understand this more, you're in a safer place where you're unlikely to be falling into that cause of wanting to influence or have an agenda per se. I think this is also a really big challenge for citizen journalists when it comes to things like using the internet and the tools of social media, because it can kind of get in your head when you are getting lots of clicks and feedback and accolades, say, from the public or whatever, that if you're not careful and you jump too quickly or respond to that rather than sticking to the motivation of, I want to make sure I know and I've confirmed what I put out, and take that responsibility very seriously. If the remembering the end goal, if the end goal is, I want to help add solid verified information for the purpose of the tool, and that can get a little bit for, I don't want to go too long on this, but here's a great example. People ask me all the time, oh, do you know how many, lots of people read that recent report you did? I saw it shared in all these different groups. Do you know how many views you got on that? I have no idea. I never have any idea. I don't have access to the background biometrics, I think they would be called. I don't ask. It's not, I don't want to know. I want to just do the work that I'm doing for the reason I'm doing it. And then it just put it out there. And if people read it and see value in it, great. If they don't, great, I tried. And so I think that's something that citizen journalists, if you're going to intentionally take an active role in trying to help inform neighbors in your community, and you feel you have time and energy to give to that, I would say that is a big need, is making sure you've really thought about your focus place and your end goal.
And to that point, Dawn, while you were speaking, Emily, you put something in the chat box that I thought was interesting, because you said the Sunshine Law applies to citizen journalists. So would you just expand on that, Emily? What did, you were writing it when Dawn was talking about a citizen journalist. So what's your perspective on that?
Oh, I mean, just that, yeah, citizen journalists are just the same as journalists, or just the same as citizens. Kind of to my earlier point, we don't have any special credential or tool that grants us access. In fact, when, you see press events are restricted to credentialed media only, the credential doesn't come from, some like National Board of Journalism Professionals or whatever. Credential just means you work for a newsroom that paid $5 to get a plastic thing on a lanyard that says you're a member of their staff, and anybody can make those. I was kind of shocked when I came into this newsroom. Before, I've always worked for other newsrooms that gave me press passes, and I guess I never questioned where they got those press passes, but you can just go online and order yourself a press pass. And so, yeah, those are somewhat meaningless, other than they do signify that you work for a newsroom. And in many media markets, those newsrooms are a known entity. Of course, it's getting harder now, right? That there's this proliferation. You used to, if you wanted to get into this business, buy a printing press. Now for $35, I can go on to GoDaddy and buy my own domain name and, get a template website. And anybody can look like they've been in this business for a really long time and print out their own press passes, right? So, but that said, it's really hard to keep people out of very public events. If it's a government event, if it's a press conference, a commission meeting, a planning meeting, everybody can have access. The only restrictions might be space. Sorry, if you're at the school board meeting and you're late, you're going to be standing outside because there's 200 people inside. We just don't have the capacity. Um, and just because we are trained journalists, or working in this field doesn't mean that they're giving us special treatment. In fact, we're probably getting the worst of it. It's very rare, these days for us to put in a public records request and it just be handed to us. We are fighting with public officials and public agencies all the time for access to information. Just a couple weeks ago, we were charged over $7,000. We put in a public records request for submissions to this government portal. And even though it says on the portal, any submissions are subject to Florida's public record law, they still want to charge us $7,000 so that they can review and redact potential information out of them.
I feel like Emily and I could probably speak on, I'm sorry to interrupt, we could probably hold a whole Zoom just on how much of our time is spent trying to get access to things that are not more readily accessible, like what happens in a public hearing.
Yes.
Background records. And I would like to clarify just on one point to the initial question that Emily was asked. When it in terms of citizen journalists or citizens being subject to sunshine law, I understand what she's meaning to say is not that we are subject to, for example, if a source were to come and speak to us, that our work is subject to sunshine. It is that we and citizens, everybody, sunshine provides all of us the same equal right to access.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I know we have a ton of other questions and we could talk about so many things, but you have important work to do, and some of us have some things that we need to return to as well. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for the future of investigative journalism. On behalf of the League of Voters of Manatee County, we're grateful for your time, your attention, and your commitment to civic engagement. And of course, we thank our speakers, Emily and Dawn. As a reminder, today's program has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel within the next day. Anyone who signed up and registered for this session will shortly receive an email with a link to that presentation. And we invite you to stay connected with the League, get involved in upcoming events and initiatives. Our website, lwvmanatee.org, has a calendar of events and action team meetings. Our next Hot Topics presentation is going to be on Tuesday, March 3rd, and it will be about voting access and empowerment. And our speakers for that session will be coming from the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, which is an organization that works with returning citizens and helping them regain their voting rights and fully rejoin our communities. And also from the organization Vote Riders, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring every eligible voter has the ID and information they need to cast a ballot with confidence. So going from knowing what you're voting about to can you and do you have the right to vote? We have to cover all of that front. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and especially thank you to our speakers. Colleen, Chantel, Mary Lynn, if we could go ahead and stop the recording.